is Maureen Williams. I'm from the Zoology Department at Trinity College Dublin. And you might be able to tell from my accent that I'm not originally from here. I'm actually from America. So people often ask, why would you ever leave the sun of Florida to come here? And the short answer is parasites. So that might be a bit surprising and a bit jarring. We're going to have a little bit of a spooky talk here, but I'd like to start with something you guys might be a little bit familiar with. So, how many of you have ever heard that a pregnant woman shouldn't clean a cat's litter box? Yeah? Yeah. Does anyone have any idea why? Exactly. So Toxoplasmosa gondii. It's a parasite that can get into humans. We're not the intended host. And actually, what happens to humans is if you're immunocompromised or if you're pregnant, you can have severe complications. However, like I said, we're not the target host of this parasite. The target host of this parasite, the final host where the parasite can reach a reproductive stage, is your normal house cat. That's where the parasite wants to be. In order for the parasite to get there, though, it has to live part of its life cycle in an intermediate host. So the intermediate host allows the parasite to grow and develop, but the parasite can't get all the way to maturity. In Toxoplasmosa, the intermediate host is a rat or a mouse. We're all familiar with those as well. We also know that normally mice and rats run away from cats. They're not friends. Tom and Jerry lied to us. They're not, good pals here. But what happens when you get a mouse or a rat that's infected with Toxoplasmosa is it no longer runs away from its predator, it runs towards its predator. So that's a pretty drastic shift in normal behavior. This is super interesting. It's definitely in the parasite's self-interest to get to its final host, to get to its cat. The cat thinks it's getting an easy meal, doesn't realize that it's about to get a parasite, and the parasite is able to continue its life cycle. So as interesting as all of this is, I think it's fascinating and terrifying. Real-life zombies here. I don't want to work on anything that can infect me. Just straight off the bat, if I can catch it, I don't want to deal with it. So, in order to work on these sorts of questions, though, to kind of figure out, we know very much what happens when one host and one parasite interact. What we don't understand is when a bunch of hosts have parasites, what does that mean? Or if conditions change, how is that going to change in the future? So, if climate heats up, what's going to happen? So in order to study these sorts of questions, we use model systems, so things that we can culture in the lab that are easier to study, that are a little less dangerous. And this is where being from Florida kind of helps, in that I'm used to running around lakes, I'm used to running around rivers, and that's where we find my model system. So I work on a species called Gammarus. You can see one on my t-shirt. I'm a bit of a fangirl. I have my lovely crocheted Gammarus, courtesy of my lab mate Paula. And you actually find these almost everywhere in Ireland. You find them in France, Germany, the USA. They're really common. But you find them everywhere from Cork out to Mayo, up to the north, down to, the Dodder just right here. So they're really common, they're really abundant, and they live in almost all lakes and rivers in the shallow end. And what they do is a really undervalued job. They're kind of like the garbage men of the aquatic ecosystem in that they take in all of the dead matter, all of the detritus, all of the dead animals, all of the gross stuff, and they process that energy to make it available for higher trophic levels, so, the things that are eating them, essentially. But they keep this cycle going, and they're really, really important. So we know that they're important. We know that they do an important job. But we also know that they can get a really interesting parasite infection. So the parasite we're looking at here is an acanthocephalin, and that just means a thorny-headed worm. They're kind of a unique kind of group of parasites. But we know that when the Gammarus is infected with an acanthocephalin, it changes its behavior to go towards the parasite's final host. So it does the same kind of manipulation, but in our model system. So what we're really interested in then is how does this behavioral change have knock-on effects? Or what's going to happen when this behavioral change happens at higher temperatures? Lakes here can get down to 3 degrees, which is pretty chilly. They can get up to 19 degrees, which is pretty warm. And that's a huge range that you're working in. That they could be, the parasite-host relationship could be changing drastically. And we honestly just haven't, until now, really had any ideas what would be happening. So I do a lot of controlled experiments to get at the heart of what's happening here. The behaviors I'm looking at are pretty universally studied, but the reason that most of you might not know what a gammarus is because they're really good at hiding. So they love to hide, behind pints, under rocks, in and around dirt, and they're very afraid both of light, and they also don't like to move upwards in response to gravity. So usually they stay at the bottom and they go to the darkness. What happens though is if you're infected, at lower temperatures and at higher temperatures, you're much more likely to go towards the light and to move up in the water column. So the final host here is a duck, or a swan, a water bird basically. And so the parasite is driving its intermediate host, in this case our gammarus, towards its predators. What's really interesting is that higher temperatures, we've been able to show that both infected and uninfected individuals are way more likely to be moving around and moving up. And so at higher temperatures, we expect there to be a lot more transmission. So kind of, to tie it all back together, what does this matter? Why are we doing this? What's the important points? So the first one is that if these gammarus are moving upwards in their ecosystem, they're moving towards their predators, they're not doing their own jobs. So we have a real risk here of having a lot of detritus left over, a lot of energy that's not being used. And that could have huge knock-on consequences that we need to start thinking about if we're going to respond to things like climate change. Second of all, if we're getting higher infection rates in our swans and our ducks, I know that all of you must be, as crazy as my friend Darren here and care about birds, right? You don't want your birds to have these huge parasite burdens. So again, we need to start considering what could be happening and how this behavioral change could drive those sorts of serious consequences. We also know that things actually seem to be a little more straightforward in this field than we originally thought they were. We thought this, all of the modeling before this, all of the statistical modeling, not Paris modeling, has shown that they thought it was going to be a lot more of a complex interaction. And it's a little bit simpler than we thought, which is great for us if we're trying to manage these things. So that's a really exciting finding. It gives us a little bit of hope there. And where the really cool, really big implications are is that there have been some studies that suggest that humans might actually be modified, our behaviors might be modified by parasites as well. These are a bit controversial at the moment, but it's been thrown out there. If we want to respond to the challenges that face humans in relation to parasites, we have to understand what the parasites are doing at a basic level. And so hopefully our work in these model systems will give us the tools to take the advantages that we can take to protect human health in the next bit. One of the interesting cases is sandfly. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. It's a really big problem in the Middle East where you have a lot of deserts and a lot of humans running around said deserts. And they've actually shown that as temperature changes, the way that humans change their behavior could make them more vulnerable. It's really good to be able to see that the parasites might also be changing as well. We've shown that in our system. And so we could perhaps add those sorts of changes in as well as we predict what might happen in human health transmission there in the future. And I am done if anyone would like to ask any questions.